Happy Thanksgiving week. We are in the final week of the regular season for the Penn State Nittany Lions football team. Plenty to talk about. Of course, the game against Minnesota, I think, as we talked about last week, was going to be closer than I think a lot of people felt, but at the same time, not that close. And of course, big news coming out of that game is the injury problem, which we'll get to here off the top of the show. But before that, we get to that, we're going to be talking to and introducing our experts. Those of you who may be new to this show, we are the Blue White Illustrated Live Show, and this is Blue White Illustrated. We have senior editor Nate Bauer. Nate, welcome to the show. How was your weekend in retrospect with regards to football, basketball? You had a lot on your plate this weekend.
Yeah, no basketball. Basketball started yesterday, which will also...
I consider that part of the weekend.
Yeah.
Last time we talked.
PSA, Penn State plays basketball in the championship round of the Sunshine Slam in Daytona. It's basically an expo center that they put some bleachers in, and it's very strange. But anyway, Penn State versus Clemson, which is actually should be a good game. This is the first game that Penn State is not the favorite. It's a 1-point dog. So that's interesting. And no, football was, everybody hates it when I say I told you so, but I said it was going to be a close game. I don't.
Hold on, Nate. We don't need to do this because we've got a graphic. So there you go. We'll say it for you with more fanfare.
Can I immediately address Lambda in the comments? 1-point win
sure.
when they intentionally went that. Like, totally. That's a great point. And I think what's fascinating to me is the notion that Notre Dame may have an opportunity to jump Penn State in the seeding for the college football playoff by the end of the weekend because they play at Southern Cal this weekend. That being in any way influenced by a 1-point win rather than a 7 or in this case 8-point win would be like incredibly fascinating to me because of what James Franklin said yesterday about how Tyler Warren going down is the epitome of what he wants the program to be. Right. And so that boomeranging around and ending up to bite Penn State would be, like next level James Franklining.
Of course, like winning and not winning the right way. That has been the criticism of this team for the entire season. Yeah, and not the upstanding morally right way, the right way to garner you the most win points outside of just getting the W. Fitz, Nate, of course, has absorbed the intro section of this show, so I'm going to say welcome to the show, and I want you to dig into our first topic of the show today. Yesterday, James Franklin said a lot of words, talked a lot about Thanksgiving, but the most notable thing to come out of yesterday's press conference, Anthony Donkoh, Alonzo Ford, both structured with long-term injuries. Of course, long-term means absolutely everything and also nothing. There's no timetable on these things, but the presumption is that they will miss the rest of whatever length of the season is for Penn State football, correct?
Hey, Nate, welcome to the show. Talk about this joyous everything that's great. And hey, Fitz, this guy's hurt and done for the year. Why does that suck? That's tough, man, because you saw it right at the start of the game on Saturday. Essentially a non-contact injury. Penn State got away with one last weekend with Jalen Harvey. They were not so lucky on these two this game. Massive injury, not in the sense, not like a Jordan Travis course-altering injury like last year with Florida State, but like, the difference there between Anthony Donkoh and Nolan Rucci. James Franklin said it on Monday. He was, pleased with Rucci's play, but at the same time, there's a bunch of plays that you can pick out and say, oh, this is where we're limited here. And I know that you've broken it down in the run game, especially. Donkoh's been so great. I think he's a special talent. I think he's a guy that is eventually, a high draft pick once he gets over the injury. But at the same time, I mean, that's your 1A going down right there. So it's a tough one to deal with. You're going to have to figure out how you can cycle those in. And we've been talking about this for a while. And I guess the silver lining here is Donkoh has battled some injuries this year, has missed a little bit of time. So Rucci's gotten more time. JB Nelson's gotten some practice time there at right tackle. Cooper Cousins is starting to get into that flow of, being an actual part of the rotation. He was in on fourth down against Minnesota in that game-winning play. Or game clinching play, I guess you can call it. But you're starting to see those guys be used more. It's not an ideal situation, but at least you've got some battle-tested guys, especially Nelson in there. So very curious to see how that split happens this week, because I think you've got to get JB right tackle snaps. I mean, I don't think there's any question that those game reps are going to be what's important going into that playoff round. So I think that's certainly a big one. It helps to have the depth that they do, but depth and talent are not the same thing. And Donkoh being out, that's going to hinder Penn State down the stretch.
Yeah, and Brad asks, is this the same injury he battled all year? No, this is the thing about Anthony Donkoh that I think is frustrating for him, and you could see it on his face when he left the field. He suffered, I think, at this point, 4 separate injuries so far in the course of this year, and I mean going all the way back to spring, where he wasn't a part of the blue-white game and was obviously banged up during the spring, and then he suffered, from what I've seen in my non-expert diagnosis, a shoulder injury, an ankle injury, and now something where he grabbed the back of his knee / hamstring last week. So that's a lot of stuff to have to work through in one season. And obviously this is the biggest blow at this point this year. The timing of these things too, I think we've all speculated what these injuries are in terms of not just what long-term means, but also what the injuries might be. Mech Engineer has given his thought in the chat, and I don't disagree with that. So when we talk about these injuries, Nate, I think these also impact 2025, where it is so late in the year. It is now almost December. Injuries that have a long time of recover, as I always bang on about, especially for big guys, Ford a defensive tackle, and Donkoh an offensive tackle, missing the offseason to rehab significantly alters your ability to progress. And I think both those guys were really good athletes this year. So it's not like they're at a position where they need to grow to be, players that can play. But at the same time, you want to be getting better every year. And I don't know what is going to be in store for them in 2025, really, is what I'm driving at. I feel like this is a blow on multiple levels, including, that defensive tackle picture for next year, which was, a mass exodus at the end of the year. What's I guess from a short-term view, we understand the issues in the playoffs. What's your view of this long-term situation with these guys?
Yeah, ditto. I think that it's a situation where you're talking about younger guys in the first place, right? Or guys who have less experience. These aren't seniors. And so the situation with Ford certainly was in the first place, like, hey, not really sure what you have, because he got hurt as soon as he got to campus for Penn State, really, right? So he arrived and got hurt shortly thereafter and missed the whole year. And so he comes back and he makes a dent. And then Donkoh, it's not exactly the same deal, but they were excited about him from the get-go. But you're really looking forward, right? It's like, oh, well, he had that great Peach Bowl performance and then is able to parlay it into a starting job, right? Yeah. Like kind of right off the bat. And so, but the deal with that is they're not finished products. These are guys who have ample, right? Like, I think that James Franklin may have even said at one point for Donkoh, like, just scratching the surface. This is,
yeah.
And so it's we're a broken record at this point, talking about time. It's not about, hey, will these guys be able to put pads on and play football in 2025? Yeah, of course. Right. Like, I don't think that's in jeopardy. It's what version of themselves will they be when that happens? And the version that it will be is, I think, and you could crush me for this if this is way out of line or out of pocket, but like, at best, the version of themselves that they are now. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have that 8-month run up to get better, to get to do all those things that make these guys better from year to year.
And for injuries that have a long rehab process, they always give you the time frame, right? Of like when a player can come back. That's a technical situation. Like that's when you can be generally returned to play. The shape you're in, the confidence you have, and then the ability to use that, kind of the relearning all those things, also takes time. And that time would probably be during the 2025 season. So I'm on your side there as well. These are not just again, we are some general speculation that we think we're pretty close on in terms of these situations, but at the same time, like there is room, I guess the glimmer of hope is there is room for positivity if these things are not as bad as we are projecting to be in this moment. Fitz, is there anything else you want to add to this particular conversation? Because it is, in a certain sense, very specific in terms of that's the information, that's the outlook. But are there how did you feel like they responded to those situations? And, Nolan Rucci, I think, comes into the spotlight here as we have spotlighted him here on the show. What do you think the options and opportunities are there at right tackle now that we know definitively what the plan is going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered it in the first part. You got to get Nelson some snaps this week, but you're going to have to be leaning on Rucci pretty heavily. And to me, you're patching it up for the playoff, which is not ideal. Obviously, you're going to see some of the better defensive lines that you've seen throughout the season come December. So I think that's certainly worth, like, people are going to put on that tape and they're going to attack that right side. I don't think there's any question about it. So you have to, the good news is you've got time to drill that out. You've got time to prepare for it. Just how does it happen when you actually have to put the helmet on December 21st or whatever it's going to be. So I think that's certainly a big deal. I don't think there's much glossing over it. I think Anthony Donkoh is one of your best drivers. Like, he's one of the guys that gets it going. And I know the run game has not been what it is, or what we expected it to be. But I think it's a very big deal. Ford the same way, especially with Keem Beeman quitting in the middle of the season. Like,
that's a big one. Yeah,
that's a big deal because you had 5 guys and now all of a sudden you have 3 guys. That's not tremendously ideal. Now, I think what we get caught up in here is, like, you think about it, Penn State's got 1 regular season game left, at least 1 playoff game left, you would think, and then maybe a second one. So, like, it's not, they're not playing another season after the regular season. So that helps you there. So you're kind of cutting down reps, you're kind of getting these guys healthy. Maybe you work in a Ty Blanding, maybe you work in Xavier Gilliam, maybe you work in a Smith Vilbert in the inside. They talked about him as an intriguing option as a defensive end sliding down. I mean, Vanover could be maybe the same way. You got to get Denai Dennis Sutton healthy. So I think the bad part here is you're looking at a team that was sort of rounding the corner, you thought, in terms of health, and then all of a sudden, not so much. So it's a tough blow this time of the season. It will impact how they call games, I think, especially in the offensive side of the ball, and it will impact depending on their draw. And that's kind of the other thing here. Like, it's all dependent on what team you play in the playoffs. Like, how much does a run stuffer like Alonzo Ford do against Miami? It's like those are the things that I'm looking at right now that say, okay, maybe you can mitigate this, maybe you can minimize this, but it's still gonna have I think a gigantic impact.
I don't think we talked enough about Alonzo Ford and the progress he had been making. Other than Zane Duran, I thought he was playing the best, the most impact plays, the high-end abilities of the defensive tackles on the roster. And that was something kind of like, the conversation with Elliot Washington, we didn't expect coming into the season to have that. It was massive. The one thing I'll say is Nolan Rucci is a fairly good run blocker. The pass protection, I think, is the area where he struggled the most this year. And so that is a very big thing for a team that was trying to work on the passing game. But the good news on that side, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to get into something more positive to talk about, is that is how this offense is at its best, is when it's mitigating those tackles, and it is using option football and some of those tricks to de-emphasize drop back passing. So trying to work that and fill that in is going to be Andy Kotelnicki's task, knowing his strengths and weaknesses of his offensive line going into the offseason. They'll have, as you guys pointed out, they'll have plenty of time to work on that. Let's talk about something that makes everyone happy, and that is beer, Fitz. Yes. Anti-fragile, holidays. I can't think of a better combination of a place to spend cool winter and late fall days than hanging out inside Anti-Fragile.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially this week with the students gone downtown. Very, very ghost towny right now. I drove through last night and I was like, what is going on here? And I realized, okay, well, nobody's here. So that's good. But people will be here this weekend. And if you're coming in this weekend, come inside. It's really, really going to not be warm outside. So get in the Anti-Fragile, have some of the best beer in State College. Of course, you can pick up mixed drinks, hard kombucha, all that stuff that, and regular kombucha as well for the non-alcoholic varieties. Really, really great hangout there on Calder Way. We love it. Nate, we're not going to play golf this week. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. So our post-round visit to Anti-Fragile will probably just have to not involve golf. So
It'll just be a visit to Anti-Fragile just because instead of a great excuse.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't need a special occasion to go to Anti-Fragile. Like it will be there for you, especially on a game weekend, especially on a weekend where you probably want to be indoors. So definitely get downtown, check them out. Of course, as well, the people are what we love about Anti-Fragile, the bartenders, the owners, everybody that treats us so well and have treated Blue White Illustrated so well. In addition to that, Lisa, one of the owners there, is putting on an art show this weekend. So if you're in town and you want to go check it out Friday and Saturday, they're working with their friends at the Super Duper Cafe, and it's not far from State College. So I'll tweet out those details later. I don't have the actual address on me, which is poor planning on my part. But Nate, I know you were in there last week talking about it, and definitely, if you want to support local art, you want to support local business, you want to support local women, that's awesome. So please do that if you can.
Appreciate it. Yeah, that's awesome. And of course, check out Fitz's social media for that. And we'll mention it if we get it. We'll mention it here over the next couple of days on the show. Of course, just a friendly reminder, we won't be here on Thursday because Thanksgiving. And sorry, I love you guys, but I'm going to spend it with my actual family and not my extended family. But we can have Nate, we can have this conversation on the Blue White Illustrated message board. I won't be on camera, but there's a good chance I'll be on the message board. And we got a great new deal, so tell everyone about that.
Yeah, we are welcoming new subscribers. Anybody, right? If you have not made the leap with us yet, please do. It is 1 week for $1 that then rolls into a half off for a year subscription. So how many 53 weeks of Blue White Illustrated for, I believe, $60, $61. So, as these things go, look, more than our information, which I think is pretty good, I would put it up against a lot. I think that we have a community of people who engage and bring out kind of the best version of fandom, right? For college football, for college wrestling, obviously for Penn State basketball, you name it. We just kind of have this great thing going of people who are on our message boards and we're there, right? So we are on site for all of the events that you are talking about in the first place. We have that insight, and then we take it to the message board where we can interact with you guys daily. So please check that out if you have not already.
Yeah, and definitely get in an argument with Nate on the message board. You'll
love it.
That is always what makes him happy, is to have a strong discourse. Let's not call it an argument. A strong discourse, intense opinions coming to a collaboration. Speaking of collaborating. Don't step on my transition.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
Frank, before we get to the transition, I completely overlooked the main part of the graphic, which has all the information that I was looking for in the lower part. So that reception is Friday, November 29th from 6 to 8. It's at the Art Alliance on 818 Pike Street in Lamont. So it's just right outside of town, right at the foot of Mount Nittany. Of course, that's open Saturday, November 30th, 10 to 5. Small Business Saturday, by the way, and Sunday, December 1st, 10 to 2. So apologize for not getting that the first time around, but I am a stickler for details. So I looked for the details and they were right in my face and I just missed them. So that's kind of what I do sometimes. So thank you for letting me share that.
Absolutely. Also, you just reset my transition because small business is what we're going to talk about next. And the Chamber of Commerce here is a supporter of the BWI Live Show, and we are a supporter of the community. So if you are a business owner who watches this show, and by the way, I can tell the number of people that watch from State College and Center County, and I know you're out there. Join us for the next small business after hours. This one at Mount Nittany Health Tofttrees. It's their brand new building just off of the Tofttrees area and the Tofttrees golf course, December 3rd. That's next week from 6 to 8 p.m. It's an exclusive networking event at Mount Nittany Health Tofttrees. Tour the new facility, which I can tell you I go there 3 times a week to work out. It is an awesome building. It is beautiful. And what can't be beat is the fact that it's in a beautiful setting. You know, Tofttrees, that area, the views are awesome. So even if you just want to come for that and you want to do a little bit of networking and you want to enjoy looking at a pretty building that's made mostly of glass, great place to be. You can enjoy plenty of refreshments and, of course, meeting other business owners and communicating and networking and helping to grow the lifeblood of State College. Because, yes, everything is built around the university and football in our world, but this is a town. This is a small city that is growing, and we want to invest in that. So join the business after hours event at Mount Nittany Health Tofttrees with the CBICC. And of course, you can go to cbicc.org to learn more and to become a member if you are a business. Let's get into the next thing, which is talking about the nuts and bolts of what happened this weekend. Penn State, Minnesota. Nittany Lions get a 26-25 win. And Nate points out that could have scored more points there in the fourth quarter. This was a super interesting game in a lot of different ways. Now, this is actually our second time talking about it because we got to have a full post-game show with both of these guys. So I don't want to cover too much of the same ground we already covered and see our tracks in the mud. But it is always interesting to go back and to talk about things that maybe we talked about a little bit on the post-game show that we think about differently now. I've got one, but I'm curious if Nate, you have anything that you've rethought or kind of reframed in your mind since the game ended Saturday at 6:55 or whatever it was.
No, I mean, they almost lost. I do think that that's maybe more of a reality than is being necessarily acknowledged. I think that even during yesterday's press conference, James Franklin acknowledged, hey, the reason why the tenor, right, the mood of this press conference is not just down in the dumps horror is because they won the game. And, they won the game by 1 point because they didn't punt on 4th and 1 on their own side of the field with a fake punt, right? That ultimately not only moved the change, but flipped the field and totally upended the dynamic of Minnesota's opportunity to then score what would have been a winning field goal. So, look, Fitz, winning is hard. It's kind of a reality that is difficult to grasp. I do think one thing that has changed since we went off the air on Saturday is all the other teams that lost.
Yeah.
It happened all over the place. I mean, while we were talking,
when we went on the air, I think Indiana was out of the playoff, right? And then all of a sudden they're back in. Like that's right. How fast this stuff can change. If you just win your games, you're okay. It's like the consistent theme of the season. I think that somebody said that before, but no, I mean, it's really fascinating to see how this all comes together, especially with championship week. Do they penalize teams for losing? I think we kind of think that 5 seed is going to be the loser of the Big 12 or the Big 10 game. But what happens with the SEC the rest of the way is anybody's guess, because not only do you still not know who's going to be in that championship game, but there's a lot of things that can happen before that. Like, I mean, it's going to be utter chaos. And the fact that, Penn State won't be a bit or shouldn't be a part of that other chaos is wonderful. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be in the position where you were ranked high to begin with and then not give up any of that ground puts a lot of this in a situation where you don't have to worry about the machinations of those seedings as long as you can take care of business this weekend. The thing that I found interesting about this game against Minnesota was that was not a clean performance from the Penn State team. Offense had issues in the run game. Landon Tengwall, I cover all these things in the film room. If you want to see the All-22 film, I was watching Landon Tengwall's breakdown today. Really good on the details in the run game of some of the things that were Why was Penn State struggling? It wasn't necessarily that Minnesota was more physical. It was just that they were getting in the backfield because Penn State wasn't blocking people correctly. Defensively, a collection of individual errors led to extended drives, which kind of changes the perception massively in the second half. Afterwards, I didn't realize this. They had the ball 4 minutes in the third quarter. We talk about the third quarter and the perception of this team and the perception of the games they play and how Minnesota plays suffocating football. They're still doing that except throwing the football. They're still bleeding the clock. So when Penn State's giving up those long drives, it's not, even if it's passing the ball, it doesn't feel the same way, but they accomplish the same thing. So when Penn State goes on a 5-minute drive to end the game, I think it's an incredibly fair point to talk about the way the offense performed in a vacuum in the second half is really sort of an incomplete situation because they scored, they went ahead, and then they kept the ball to end the game. And that was really the entirety of their offense in the second half. I guess I'll just go
on their own terms. Like that was the entire theme of it. And I think if you're going to win a playoff game, you have to coach like that. And it's a really good sign. I thought it was a really well coached game by Minnesota. They stuck to their game plan. They did a really good job executing it. Obviously the talent level, a bit slighted to Penn State there, but like they did a really good job of dictating what they wanted to do. And, I think the early injury certainly to Donkoh kind of helped that happen. But at the same time, I mean, Minnesota came out and got it. And it was an impressive, I thought it was pretty impressive by that staff over there. The other thing is flip that on its head. Penn State all of a sudden gets aggressive and they're like, okay, well, we're going to put the foot on the neck here and just keep you down. And that was good. And then the fourth down call at the end, you've got Minnesota having to go 50 yards in 20 seconds or whatever. Like, I think that's another call that you make, and the analytics greatly support it, but also it's a gut call at the end as well. So you've done a really good job of making those decisions that sometimes are data-based, sometimes are feeling-based. And, for all the flack that James Franklin gets about being a game day coach, like, pretty darn good calls right there.
Yeah, I would agree, especially on that final drive. Nate, I can see you're loading up. I shouldn't have stepped in. Just go right ahead. Go for it.
I see this comment, David Bortner, loyal listener, reader, subscriber, whatever. It's the opposite of that, but it's the direct inverse of what you're saying. He coaches aggressively, uber aggressively in games where Penn State doesn't have as good of players as the team that they are playing against because of the opportunities to win are fewer, right? So things like punting in the first half at Minnesota, right? There was that, what were they, 38-yard line, maybe, had a 4th and 1 and punted.
Are you talking about the pooch punt or a different
No, I'm saying earlier in the game, in the first half, when it was still not
okay.
Like it was fine. And my point being, games that he feels that Penn State has the advantage and can go longer and just outlast an opponent, right? That over the course and the span of the game, that is where you see the more conservative decision making. It bears itself out over 10 years. But games like, and again, it's just a wild disconnect to me. All of the things that people have hated that he has chosen to do, the 2-point conversions against Michigan, the 4th and whatever, going for it on their side of the field at Ohio State a couple of years ago. All of those calls are because the team is not as good as the opponent that they're playing. And so you have to seize and take advantage of the opportunities that you have. You have to be more aggressive. You have to be willing to roll the dice a little bit more in those situations than you otherwise would, because your opportunities to beat that team are fewer.
Right. No, I would agree with you. The only thing I would say is that this is a context of comparison. The last 2 games, especially 2023 against Ohio State, Penn State, from a talent perspective, felt like that was an even game. So I think there was less aggressiveness in that particular game, and especially from an offensive side, where the defense felt like it was at the level of Ohio State. Marvin Harrison Jr. aside, Obviously, having a top 5 pick at receiver is something that they're used to on that side. But Penn State did a really good job of holding that into a certain level of contain, but the offense did defer winning until the fourth quarter. And that is, I think, a shift in how they felt about this particular situation. And of course, also the personality of the play caller and the game plan that was presented on that particular day. So I think that there is a tonal shift at certain times, but over the large course of that, I agree with you 100%. Last thing, and I got to say this because this is my, we do these things in reaction. I am a human being, and somebody asked James Franklin, as a person, that fourth down call, how were you thinking about if it doesn't go right? So we sit here after the post-game show, we have a conversation, and we read the comments. I have to moderate the YouTube channel. I read the comments. Nobody likes Tony Rojas for some reason this year. Every time I go back and I watch the film, I'm like, he wasn't that bad. We are now 11 times into this process. And after the game, without watching the film, using one or two plays out of context that I didn't have a full appreciation of the extended understanding of the play, went, yeah, I don't think this is a good game. Guys, this was his best game. This was the best game of Tony Rojas's career, short career here this season. So to the Tony Rojas and his family, to the universe, to the football gods whom I shamed in that moment, I just would like to apologize publicly for giving into peer pressure. Tony is not being an impact linebacker that is going to be the superstar of the linebacking unit. He also did his job exceptionally well this past weekend, absorbing blocks, forcing the ball into other people for them to make a play. I thought he executed his role other than one or two plays very well this weekend. And I just wanted to correct myself because this is one of the things I saw in the film study that I was wrong about on the postgame show. Anyone else want to join me up here at the altar?
I mean, we just latch on to the memories, right? Like it's not about the full body of work for most. It's about kind of like when we're talking about a long snapper here, you only hear his name when something goes wrong. And, that's kind of where you're at with everybody now. It's like, hey, this guy missed a tackle. He sucks. Like, that's not really the case. I mean, you're going to come away from last week thinking Jalen Reed's not a good safety. Like, that's not the case. And that's kind of where we've latched on to it. The internet doesn't help there. But that's kind of where we're at with that. And yeah, I agree with you. I think he's made some strides, and I think that's what we keep going back to with this team. Like, we're not telling you it's a world beater. Like, we're not telling you that this is a 10-1 football team. That is a fact. That is pretty much the only fact that you can come up with this team. Mm-hmm. They're 10-1. I don't care if they're the best 10-1 team, the worst 10-1 team in the country. They're a 10-1 team. That's what matters right now. Going back to that is you've got a lot of holes to work on, a lot of things to take over the next month to try to sort of patch up or fix. Like it's probably going to be a patchwork job. It's not a lot of time. I mean, it's great that they get a month between, or I guess 3.5 weeks or whatever between games. But it's not going to all be fixed, and this isn't going to be a steamroller here. But I think the flip side of that, you look at college football, how many steamrollers are out there? Like,
right.
Ohio State looked good this weekend. Oregon always looks good, but they've had issues both of those teams have had issues in the past. I think it's going to be very interesting to see in that semifinal round who gets up and how tight these games become, because coaches coach different, players play different when the other team is equal or greater or close to the talent level. So I think, to me, that's the most fascinating thing about this playoff is, yeah, upsets happen all the time in college football when you don't expect them. When Purdue beats Ohio State that one year, like Ohio State isn't giving the same energy that they're giving Penn State or Michigan or even Indiana last week. I think that was the first time Ohio State's ever played Indiana like they've played a premium opponent. And I think you got the results of how that came out.
We are going to get back to this conversation. There's some more to clean up from the game against Minnesota in the BWI Mailbag, but we have also recruiting news, which is a big thing this time of year, 8 days out from National Signing Day. So let's get to that information on Fitz's recruiting update. Fitz, that is the perfect image to come back to with you on your phone, looking at more information about what's going on right now with Penn State recruiting. Of course, we're going to have a Inside the Den podcast coming up this week to give you the details inside the details about recruiting in this final push. Lots of important stuff going on. Some of the more public things we're going to talk about here on Fitz's recruiting updates. So where do you want to start in the recruiting news from this weekend, Fitz?
I'm going to start right now with some developing news, and it was perfect day for your word of the day calendar to be machination. I don't know where that came from, but when you said that, all of a sudden Mack Brown got fired at North Carolina. So that's an interesting one, because you look at the coaching changes and a lot of them are expected, and Mack Brown was kind of expected in terms of like, this was one that should happen, but Mack, I believe he said it again this week that he planned on coming back. So that's a big one. You look at North Carolina's commit list, and there's a guy that really is sticking out there. Penn State has been after Bryce Baker, the quarterback, for a while. There's contacts there. Danny O'Brien went to the same high school as Bryce Baker. And Penn State's been on him for a while. And basically it was a situation where Bryce Baker's not going to look around if Mack Brown's still the head coach. I know a couple other schools, Clemson's still talking to him as well. Michigan had been reaching out, but of course they got Bryce Underwood last week. So all of a sudden, and I'm not saying it's going to happen because this is very, very much a developing story, but Bryce Baker might be in a situation where he's, all of a sudden back on the market, or at least entertaining options. You're going to see situations like this, and signing day is in a week and a half, or I guess 2 weeks now. Signing day is not far off. Actually, no, gosh, this calendar is messing me up, man. It's a week from tomorrow. So do guys like Bryce Baker all of a sudden have to push it back to February? Is he a January enrollee? I don't know. So usually quarterbacks are. So all of a sudden, this got interesting. So very, very curious to see, because Penn State's one of the few schools that has kept up contact. And I think Baker, probably one of the few schools that Baker has allowed to keep up contact, because he's always been pretty much all in for North Carolina. I don't know how quickly North Carolina can have a coach in place. The December calendar is going to be interesting because it goes dead and then it opens back up to quiet. So maybe you can get guys back on campus in December, and maybe he's the guy that pops up. And you look at Penn State's situation at quarterback in the class of 2025. Beckham Kritza, of course, still in the class, but Penn State's been looking for a while now. So that's just to me, and this is just off the top of the head riffing type stuff. Like, that's very interesting to have the coaching change in Chapel Hill happen on a live show. Of course, I'd love to have more information before I rattle off and open my mouth about it. But this is one Penn State's been tracking for a while. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's not anything that we haven't been talking about as well. Like this has been kind of on your radar for a little bit. Another great reason to be subscribed to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because these are the details that when they become public and we have this conversation, there is that backstory for you to know. So just clarify something for me, because I think this is always the confusion in my head and probably in other people's heads. You don't have to sign and this might be what you just said. You don't have to just sign next Wednesday. So with the new calendar and how condensed everything is, a player, and there are probably 25 players having to make this decision now with Mack Brown being fired. They don't have to make a decision in 8 days, right? That they could sign in, or they could go to places in December and then try to make a decision within that time frame. You can commit any time in December. Just most people make their decision on that first day. Is that accurate, or is there more shades of gray there?
Yeah. Actually, I think you don't have to sign. Like, that's the thing here. Like, you can figure out a way to get around it and just enroll in January. Like, I don't think you have to figure all that stuff out if you actually enroll. It's kind of what the transfers go through. So you've got an opportunity, if you're Bryce Baker, to maybe sit this one out in signing day. And I don't know what North Carolina is doing with the staff. I think I just read that Mack Brown's going to coach this weekend. But that's a heck of a turnaround time, because usually you have those 3 or 4 weeks where it's kind of dead season for coaches there. If you're getting fired, you have a chance to either make a quick hire and turn that around, or, flesh it out until the new year. So I don't know how it's going to go, but yeah, if he's a January kid, he doesn't have to sign on December to still end up somewhere in January. So I think that's very, very interesting. Like I said, I don't know the details in terms of when he wants to get to North Carolina or wherever he ends up. But I mean, in terms of throwing wrenches into plans, the week before you're supposed to sign, that's a pretty good indication that he might pick up the phone if James Franklin calls him today.
Yeah, and that's one of those situations you called all the way back in August, and we've had this conversation all year long of, this is going to be messy. with the timeline of when coaches get fired to this signing day, there's going to be a lot of newness for everyone around this particular situation. So we'll keep you up to date at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Of course, Fitz and Ryan Snyder are going to be doing a great job getting you that information and trying to source the facts away from just the news and what's going on out in the public.
And to play off of what I said about not necessarily like signing and enrolling, there's also really nothing penalizing someone from going somewhere or signing. Like he could sign with North Carolina. Julian Sayin last year signed with Alabama. Kalen DeBoer comes in, brings his own guy with him, and all of a sudden, I think he committed to Ohio State in January, like mid-January, late January, something like that. So like he's not exactly tied down if he does sign with North Carolina. So I think that there's some interesting developments there. It's just it's one of those things where the rules are kind of crazy, but with the portal, like he can go in the portal on January 5th. You know, it's not a big deal for him. So very curious,
especially somebody who has options, as many options as a quarterback, not only the position, but also, as you can see, a consensus 4-star player, a top 200 player at the very least, if not a top 150, if not a top 100 player, across the board in the industry rankings. You can see here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. If you're listening on the podcast, obviously, you're hearing me say these things. It's not a wide range in the consensus. 192 is the lowest, 74 on 3. I trust our rankings and Charles Power the most, obviously. So this is a very good quarterback who is just outside the top 10 in this class. I'm not saying he's going to end up at Penn State, but I'm just saying when you get this news on a live show, that's where the first place my brain went to, and because they have been talking to him for a while now. So it's not a situation where it's like, oh, Mac Brown's fired, let's take a look at that commit list and see who makes sense. This is a guy that they've actually been talking to, and this is a guy that they've got some connections with. So, in terms of turning up at the end of the cycle, that's very interesting to me. So what else is going on this weekend? A couple things here before we get into the mailbag.
Yeah, this weekend's interesting. Actually, go back to last weekend. I didn't realize how much. Well, first off, from a Penn State scheduling perspective, that kind of sucked because you look around the country last weekend and this was the big rush weekend. Like this weekend coming up is big in the sense, but it's also a holiday weekend. So not everybody wants to travel. Some guys want to, like the younger guys probably want to go to Ohio State, Michigan. I don't blame them. Auburn, Alabama. I don't blame them as well.
Yeah.
Penn State, Maryland, probably not as quite on the high on the list there. But last weekend, a more important weekend with the way that the calendar is set up with signing day next week, more important weekend than I gave it credit for. So you saw guys pop up for visits for games. You saw guys pop up for visits for bye weeks. Brendan Finney went to Oregon over the weekend. That's, I don't think, great news for Penn State at all. But it was just a really random weekend. So if you're trying to figure out and you're trying to hammer out the final details before you sign, last weekend was a big weekend and Penn State was on the road. So that kind of sucked for them in terms of the grand scheme of things. Also, Andrew Olish, from a Penn State perspective, you thought it was going to be okay because his game got moved from Friday night. They were playing in Shamokin Friday night to Saturday. And you're like, okay, well, he's not going to Michigan anymore for a game visit. Well, he went to Michigan on Sunday. So there's that to deal with. I think and we'll talk more about this on the premium show, but Bryce Underwood's presence is certainly a talking point in that recruitment. Beyond that, Jaden Woods, the Penn State defensive end commit, went to Florida over the weekend for a visit. There's a lot to take in over this past weekend. And like I said, I probably underrated it and didn't even think about it twice, to be honest with you, when you're talking about the scheduling. But having a week or having a home game the week before Thanksgiving all of a sudden is a big deal. It's kind of like the Lash Bash in the sense that some guys want to make their decision before their season, before they get into practice and everything like that in August. So this is your last ditch effort to get them in. And yes, this coming weekend is a last ditch effort, but comparatively to some of the big games that we saw around the country last weekend, it's probably not going to live up to that standard. I think the visitor list, and Ryan has started the visitor list on Blue White Illustrated, it'll be solid, but I don't think it's going to be anything spectacular just based on the timing of the weekend and the other options, especially out west in Ohio.
So just kind of a temperature gauge for you here. Don't have to give any details because, again, we're going to be talking about this extensively here this week. Coming down the stretch, hot, cold, lukewarm. Like, how's your oatmeal coming into National Signing Day for Penn State's chances to add a couple of players or, retain what they have here?
certainly still a possibility. It's not hot. I'll tell you that. Wrote in the SN last week that it was there's some things that some shoes still to be dropped and things of that nature. There's still a bunch of guys on the board, but number one, you've got to retain the guys that you have. Of course, you've got situations like Jaden Woods going to Florida. You've got Chaz Coleman, who picked up an Ohio State offer. You can't ignore that, obviously. So that's priority number one. Then you've got those guys that are pretty much the same cluster of guys that we've been talking about that are, yet to make decisions, or they have made decisions and they just haven't, the flip targets haven't completely finalized those things. So yeah, I would not say hot at all is basically how I would go with that.
Brad Moeller asks, is Finney coming this weekend? That is a great question for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can sign up right now and you can get premium access to all of our best stuff, including maybe that answer on the 2025 recruiting message board. You enroll for $1 this week, and then you're enrolled for a year at half off. It is our best two deals. Everyone loves the dollar deal. They love getting in and trying things out, and people love signing up for half off. We combine them for you, which you can subscribe. And this is a really important time of year to get the rest of the sentence. Like, this recruiting update is half of the sentence. The other half we save for people over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Okay. If you can't tell, the mailbag is my favorite segment on probably any show we do. And that's why I do a show's worth of questions, and we have about 15 minutes. So Nate, we're jumping right in here. And David WG asks this question, and it is the Nate Bauer special. Is Penn State fundraising priorities for the stadium renovations or NIL? Several seven-figure donations, notably for the stadium, but he's nothing for the NIL front. So first off, he says, thanks, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you, David. He is a longtime Blue White Illustrated member, and I believe he started as a YouTube show guy first. So always appreciative, super thankful for you guys. But Nate, if they aren't being announced, does that mean they're not happening when it comes to NIL?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's some, right? They're still doing things. Look, I think that there is a fundamental and I see it everywhere, so it's not like this is unique to Penn State, but let's look across the Midwest to a Big Ten brethren, right? And they released the renderings and big flashy promo video of Northwestern's new stadium, what their plans are, right? $800 million stadium that they're going to do at Northwestern. And all of the reaction was the same thing. It was, man, if you just spent this money on NIL, you would have a juggernaut. Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for life.
Your father would be so proud right now.
My dad doesn't fish. Anyway, look, here's the bottom line. Revenue is revenue, and revenue will be able to be spent on NIL, on player acquisition, right? You're paying for a roster. It's the same. It's just the pros are here now, right? And so the deal is not spend as much money as you can on the stadium, but you want to have a great stadium that has revenue opportunities as much as you possibly can. And so that is what the anticipation is for Penn State, is if you get the investment in the stadium, if you can pay for the stadium, if you're not doing a long-term, and obviously they are slated to do a long-term debt servicing of the stadium renovation, but as much of that as you can bite off as is possible, it opens the door to revenue generation. It is people who will spend big money. It will make the ledgers high, right? The balance will be higher. And then at that point, you can spend that money. Again, it's an internal thing. You can spend internally on your players. Can you do it right this second? No, but like all of this stuff, everything that's happening right now is for a future that is not yet secured, but also like that for the listeners, that's me winking.
Yes.
It is, that's what's coming, is you will simply have a payroll that you can pay out as you see fit. All the NIL as it's currently constructed with the collectives, like that fan input and engagement will still exist in the future, but it will exist as a whipped cream and cherry type situation, right? Where you can top yourself off, but the fundamentals of paying your players is going to be something that everybody has to grapple with and everybody has to deal with. And the haves are going to be the people and the athletic departments that make money, right? Like just have money. And so that's where that's going.
JC Corrigan in the chat asked, did Franklin commend Tyler Warren for not pulling a Devin Ford? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. James Franklin, Whisperer, Nate Bauer has talked about that in the past when this has come up before. And there's nothing that is not more obvious than when James Franklin is trying to say, see, I told him not to do something like that in 2020. So yes, that absolutely was what was going on the other day. It wrapped in praise for Tyler Warren, primarily praise for Tyler Warren, but also on the back end, that's what we coach, right? Nate?
Yeah, I don't know that I did not make the direct Devin Ford correlation because I think those were like a little bit different situations, although I guess they were closer than I'm acknowledging, but more to the effect of, hey, Tyler Warren didn't lose sight of himself. He didn't lose sight of the moment. It's about situational football and just being heady and having that. Now, granted, the direct corollary is, yes, that's a thing that they communicate to the players is what was the word? Surrender?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Is like, hey, this is a surrender situation. And he executed where others in the past may not have. Sure.
Let's go to this one. Fitz. Grap54 says, what do you see as the direction of the running game taking the running game takes forward given injuries and availability? And I think that goes both ways. James Franklin did talk yesterday, and Nate wrote about this, of Nick Singleton is healthy now. Anthony Donkoh is not, but that is now a final conclusion in those two ways. And Nate, I know the nuance is he's as healthy as he is at this point in the year. Yeah. But at the same time, like, he has looked more explosive. That was kind of the conversation. So Fitz, do you see anything different from what Grapp is asking here of maybe a change one way or the other?
I don't. I think you obviously have to deal with Donkoh not being in there, but I don't think things change much schematically. T. Frank, you'd be a better answer at this because the time that Donkoh did miss, Rucci got some extended run, and you said he's a pretty decent run blocker in his own right. So I don't think it changes much. Do you happen to have the chart that I sent you right before we went on the air? I don't mean to do that for you right now, but when you're talking about Penn State's running backs and their ability to make things happen after contact, it hasn't been great. Not been great. Parker Fleming put something up on Twitter earlier today talking about the running backs' efficiency after contact, and Penn State, not great. You can see that on the chat. Run game physicality, broken or missed tackles and yards after contact. Penn State on the left side of that list. You don't want to be on the left side of that list. And I don't think it's a surprise to Penn State fans in terms of watching the running game, but those guys have not been tremendously elusive. And then after contact, which is kind of what you expect for a 225-pound back to keep going after contact. I don't think that's something that's been great for Penn State. So you talk about the scheme, you talk about Penn State's ability to get these guys in space, but when they get in space, they need to capitalize on it. I think Nick's looked better. Frank, you were boiling the other day after the game, talking about Nick has kind of reverted to the smash and grab type stuff. But
it's just a part of it. So there are two things here about the run game, and James Franklin talked about this yesterday, where he said they need to capitalize on those opportunities to break tackles, yards after contact. This is the direct graph saying about that. Watching the film, the offensive line, and yes, there were some issues with the offensive line, but they also got perfectly blocked run plays to get the runner to the safety multiple times. It is the running back's job. I go all the way back to when I was early in my career, and Saquon Barkley was talking about, like, I've got to make the safety miss. That's my job. Nobody was better about making the one player miss than Saquon Barkley.
And the best running back in the world. Got it.
Yes. But so, like, in the easiest example to show the best and then show everybody else, that's the difference in the run game is Nick and Katron are not on that level, which of course one running back is on that level, and then everybody else. And so they just need to improve on making the safety miss, because even in 2023, there were opportunities where they got a perfectly blocked run play to get these players to the safety. Teams started putting that safety at the 1 yard line over the course of the 2023 season, but against Minnesota, it was not at the 1 yard line. It was 5-6 yards down the field, and you get an 8-yard run. That's great. It should have been, if you break one of those tackles in that specific situation, 17, 20, etc. So the opportunities for the run game are still there, even without Anthony Donkoh. And I think that's a really important thing. I'm going to get my last filibuster here, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Grapp is back with another question. He says, based on your film study, are the wideouts, 1, not getting open, but Tyler Warren is; 2, Drew is still a bit gun shy about throwing down the field; 3, is Warren preferred, and so it doesn't matter on as many plays whether the wideouts get open? The answer is all 3. James Franklin's, it's all of it. There are plays that Drew is turning down. Specifically in this past game, I noticed that Andy Kotelnicki saw something on film and then came back to a very similar concept 2 plays later. So a run play or a swing pass or something in between, and then came back to another explosive play 2 plays later, and Aller either hit it for a touchdown or he made the same decision. So yes, there are some of those. Let's also talk about the game plan. So in this particular situation, we had a lot of questions about the receivers in the Blue White Illustrated message bag on the forum. This was not a game for me to criticize the wide receivers because, like I said, they had about 10 plays outside of the final drive where they're trying to milk the clock in the fourth quarter. And the plan was to get the ball to Tyler Warren in the second half. Like, bar none, the plan was get the ball to Tyler. And when that didn't happen, they checked it down to Nick Singleton in a couple of situations that netted some really positive plays. So the receivers were involved in the first half, and then the plan pivoted. At least that's from the execution and the plays that were called 2 screens to Tyler Warren. When that's like 20% of your passes, we can't bash the receivers for not having an opportunity. But yes, there are games. This last game was not one of them where they're not getting open. So just on the whole, this cumulative effect, this year after year and game after game lack of receiver production is not applicable. We have to be selective now when we have this conversation, and I don't think that past Saturday was the right time to be talking about those receivers. That I think is the last question that I'm for sure we wanted to answer. Fitz, Nate, did you have a follow-up opinion on that one? I'll throw you here one about something else we talked about already on the show.
I thought that the Omari development is important, and I think it will continue to be important. It's not a volume situation for Omari. It is once a game. But if you can get that once a game, that's the difference. That's right. It's something that spans. Yes, it was critically important in that game in particular, but just in general, it changes, how kind of the offense can function, and it changes the score. So I think the ability to do that and demonstrating it in week 11 after it had disappeared for a month and a half of the season, it is, I think, at minimum, a step in the right direction for those guys.
Yeah,
for sure.
And David says they need to keep targeting Omari if possible. I think the big if possible, or the big thing there is if possible. Like, if he's open, throw it to him. But there was a big stretch there where, it's very hit and miss in terms of, especially with his physicality coming off the line. Like, if it's open, great for it. Drew's got to anticipate that a little bit better. And I think that's kind of the theme of the last couple of weeks when we're talking about dicing down his game is the anticipation of guys that are going to come open and reverting off of that and going to the security blanket, which is damn good security blanket in Tyler Warren. But I think that's what you got to keep looking at. So I agree with Nate. It's a smash and grab type thing. But it's definitely got to be part of, or at least an option moving forward.
2 things here in the chat. Rob says, you think Omari would be able to beat safeties? Yes and no. It is about schematic structure. So you have quality opportunities like that against 2 high structured defenses that are playing cover 2 or quarters. When you have a deep safety in the middle of the field and they're prepared for it, because it is a strong tendency in this offense, that opportunity is less open for a quarterback that's going to read the progression and not going to just chuck it up. He's going to chuck it up to the right decision, not necessarily my guy's faster than a safety, if the safety is like grabbing him down the field and there's no open play.
And if you look at the success that Penn State's had on that, it's not necessarily, hey, Omari, run a straight line, run a fly pattern. It is a post that also honestly comes across the formation. I know it's a bit exaggerated there, but he's throwing it across. He's not throwing it down the field. And I think that that's the big thing that you're looking at. And you need to have pass protection for that. And you need to have sort of that progression, that analysis of the entire field of Drew Aller. And it doesn't happen often. Like, yes, he should be able to beat safeties because he's faster than safeties. That's not the game here. Like, it's not a foot race. It is a scheme versus scheme type thing. And if you find that if you're running a post and there's a safety right there, like, I don't care how fast you are, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Mech Engineer he says beat the safety on the second one that went incomplete. Actually, there's an exception to what we're talking about here, because yes, that was a defense where he got behind and Drew did throw it because he did get leverage on those players. So yeah, I think that's a fair counter to that conversation. But we've seen that once this year. That, I guess, is my one retort to that. Austin asks, how do you get the premium podcast on the site? That is a great question. It will be in an individual article. There's no way for me to get you a premium podcast on our normal podcast routine. So you have to go to bluewhiteillustrated.com. It will be in an article that will have a featured video and will have the audio embedded in there, and then I will have the video embedded on the message board as well. But you got to go to the site, you got to go to the article, and I'll try to make that like a billboard plastered everywhere for you guys to find when we get it out and for you this week, because it is an ever-evolving landscape, as we've talked about here on the live show. The situation has changed in the last hour, let alone when we record it and then when it is put out. So when we do that, please have the grace to understand this is a very busy time of year, and we're giving you the latest information that we can possibly give you at the moment when we record that. So that's going to be my final pitch for the show. Please join us. We're out of time, though, so thank you to Sean Fitz and to Nate Bauer for joining me on the BWI Live Show. As a Thanksgiving present to them, I'm getting us out here only a minute over time instead of 3 to 4, which we've done recently. So happy Thanksgiving, Fitz. I know this is the last time for you guys here on the show. I just want to say thank you so much to you guys for putting up with me doing the show, for being as awesome, and for getting as much great information to fans as possible here on the show. So I'm grateful for you guys, and we'll be back tomorrow with Greg, who gets the same spiel. Talk to you then.